Hey, everybody. We are joined today by Rick Munarriz. He's a longtime Motley Fool contributor and a longtime Netflix shareholder. I'm actually kind of really interested to get into this story because, one, I've never owned the stock for 22 years. I started investing, sooner than that, um, and especially not a massive home run like Netflix has been. So we're going to talk about that, why Rick's still holding some shares of Netflix today. Before we do, check out the link you see on your screen, fool.com/Frankel. Get the top 10 stocks to buy right now from my sponsor, The Motley Fool. It's the best way to support this work we're doing here on YouTube. Again, that link is fool.com/Frankel. Check it out. So Rick bought Netflix stock for the first time 22 years ago. So doing a little bit of math in my head, that's 2002. And I was a Netflix customer in 2002, not a shareholder. And at that point, correct me if I'm wrong, they were purely a mail order business, right,
Yes.
Rick?
Yeah, it was just you put in a little list and they would send something to you initially just from California. Eventually they built out regional centers, so there was one close to you. And yeah, you just put a list and they send in the mail, almost like GameFly, if you remember the video game business. But they delivered movies, discs, DVDs, and then eventually Blu-rays. But yeah, a very simple business model that clearly took off.
Well, at the time, their biggest competitor was Blockbuster Video,
Yeah.
and there were some big consumer pain points with Blockbuster. Well, I mean, not only just having to drive to the store, which wasn't really a big deal,
Yeah.
but there were the late fees. Netflix got rid of late fees. It was okay. You can have one DVD out at a time. If you don't return it, we're just going to keep billing you your monthly membership fee. If you return it, you can have as many as you want, as frequently as you can get them back.
Yeah.
So it got rid of a lot of pain points. So I have a few questions, but mainly Netflix was it was just a mail order business back then. The streaming didn't exist yet. How in the world did you think to even buy Netflix stock 22 years ago?
Right. So again, you mentioned I've been a long time fool. I've been with the Motley Fool since 1995. So I've been covering, and I covered restaurant stocks initially, and then got into online stocks and technology stocks, entertainment stocks, fund stocks that I cover now. And Netflix was on my radar when it went public earlier in 2022. And my first article in May of 2022, I basically dissed it. I called it a dog, just like the barking dog. I called it a dog stock when it went public. Just the model, for the same reason, I felt Blockbuster, why Netflix when you can just go across the street and get your local Blockbuster and take care of your video flicks? Then it became a broken IPO, and in October of 2022, I became an investor. And a week later, in October 14, 2020, 2002, sorry, 2002 is when it went public. 2002 is when I bought it, 5 months after the IPO. And I wrote a story, and you mentioned Blockbuster, the story, and you could find it. It's a Motley Fool on the Hill piece called Netflix, a Blockbuster ? So I did throw in the Blockbuster reference in there. And I explained why I had bought it earlier that month. And again, I had just spent about $3,000 to buy 500 shares at the time. And it seemed like pretty much like it was a big chunk of change for me to put into a stock at any point, but back then especially. And that's 500 shares before we had a 2-for-1 stock split in 2004, a 7-for-1 stock split in 2015. So if I would have kept those shares, those 500 shares would have been 7,000 shares worth $4.5 million today. And unfortunately, the story does not end well for me. I sold essentially practically all of it. So within a couple months, I sold 400 or 80% of the shares. It was up a little bit. I got cocky, and I was sort of a trigger-happy investor back then. And I said, hey, this is good enough. I nailed it. I nailed the bottom, and I may have been nailing the top, so I dumped it. And then after that, I said, well, if I hold on to 20% of my shares, that would be like $900,000 today. That would be awesome. But no, in 2016, I sold half my shares. 2018, I pruned it even more. 2020, and I unloaded some in 2021 and 2021 twice, and 2023, early 2023. So I sold 5 other times. I'm down to just 1% of my shares. And well, I don't think I'll ever sell this just because I can say this is like my story. This is my conversational piece. Hey, some people have, if you're lucky and you're in the market enough, you're going to get a 10-bagger. It will happen eventually. Stay in the market long enough, make some picks, be patient. It'll happen. Some people, rare people, but get 100-baggers. I have a 1,000-bagger on my Netflix position, which is just mind-boggling to think it's happened. But basically got it almost at the bottom in early October and wrote about it. So it's documented there. And I'm down to just 1%. How different my life could have been if I would have held the other 99%. But to me, it's just part of the learning thing. And I think, while I can't say that I've learned enough, that $4.5 million dollars worth of lessons from selling the 99% of my Netflix stock, I do think it made me a better investor, and I sort of appreciated what I got and made me patient with some of my other positions.
Yeah, I have a very similar story that didn't, that kind of makes me cry every time I think about it. It's I got into the Tesla IPO, or I bought, I think maybe a month after the IPO. It was at the time I put about $2,000 into it. I bought 100 shares of just over $20 a share. That was before all of the splits that it's done. And I wrote a story about this. I at the time of my wedding, I had two stocks in my portfolio because I was a pretty new investor. I had Tesla and I had AT&T, and I decided to sell Tesla to pay for my catering bill. It had tripled. It just became the Motor Trend car of the year, the Model S, and I owned it for about a year, and it tripled. So I, just like you, I said, I won. This is I might be calling the top here, and I sold it to pay for my catering bill. Obviously, it was a terrible mistake. If I had kept it, I could have literally bought 5 Model S's with the profits.
Wow.
So but it's made me a better investor for the lesson I learned. And my hope is that over my investing career, the profits I'll make from the lesson I learned will be more than the profits I've left on the table from Tesla. But one thing I kind of wanted to pivot, get me off on a Tesla rant. I could do a whole video on that. It brings up a really good point and a question that, as a certified financial planner, I get asked all the time: when should you sell a stock? And you and I both broke the cardinal rule that you don't sell a stock just because it went up. At the time you sold, you mentioned you sold 80%. I assume you had a very nice gain locked in at that point. Was there anything that had fundamentally changed about the business that prompted you to sell, or was it just a price motivated sell?
No, it was price motivated. And again, with Netflix back then, they were just this was like early. This was like the early days. I don't remember what their membership base was at that time, but it wasn't a lot. This was when they started to open a regional distribution center so they can get your DVD to you in a day or two rather than 3 or 5 days when they used to ship it out of California. So it was still a very imperfect business. But to me, I felt like, hey, I don't know where this is going to end off. I mean, this is just basically a fancy mail order business. I'm glad I caught the bottom. I didn't think that Reed Hastings was going to be such a master chess player. Stuff even like the Quickster fiasco when they changed their names to Quickster, started getting into streaming. It turned out to be such a smart response to separate the two businesses, and everyone hated it. There's been many times when people have hated what Netflix does, and it winds up being the right thing. So yeah, to me, it wasn't a matter of the business wasn't changed. Fundamentally, it was fine, and I wish I would have just been more patient. And even in the future, again, so when it was at 80%, when it was at 20, I had 20% of the shares, it just became a large, outsized 6-figure position for me. And I'm like, that's really not something I want to hold when it's so much weight on one stock. And again, I took that money, cashed out, put it in stocks that, for the large part, since 2016, vastly underperformed Netflix. So it's not. It was another bad reason to sell too. It's part of the process.
All right, so let's talk about a potentially good reason to sell, because, like you said, you're still holding on to some. Your position's much less than you initially put in, but let's just say, for example, that you had held till today. The streaming wars have clearly heated up since Netflix first burst onto the scene. They clearly pioneered the streaming platform. I remember I was a high school teacher when Netflix really got into streaming, and one of my students had to explain to me how it worked because I didn't even understand the concept yet. But having said that, the streaming wars have heated up significantly. So, do you think Netflix shareholders today should be worried about the streaming wars, or is Netflix so far ahead that they have a big competitive moat?
Yeah, to me, I think, again, the fact that they're profitable and very profitable right now, whereas the competition is not, is definitely this invisible moat that no one really talks about. The scalability, the fact that they have all this data on what 278 million people are watching at any point worldwide. It's the kind of advantage that you really can't put a price tag on. But to me, the streaming wars, again, Netflix, 270 million, 30% of them are in the U.S. It's no longer a U.S. company. It is a global juggernaut. So when we're talking about the streaming wars here in the U.S. with the Peacocks and the Paramounts and the Showtimes and the Amazon Primes all battling it out, it doesn't play the same way in other markets. But more importantly, the streaming wars, the fact that everyone else is losing money, is doing two things that are helping Netflix right now. One is they're cutting back on content. Everyone from Disney to Comcast has said, hey, we're paring back on the amount we're spending on new content, which is going to help Netflix. And also the fact that they're raising prices to help offset that. So while Netflix has also come through with increases, just a couple days ago, Comcast with Peacock Plus, they raised their prices by 20% or so, like $2 a month. So it's the kind of thing where, as the competition is increasing their prices and you're seeing them do that, that gives Netflix the flexibility to say, I can increase prices, and they have, of course. They're $15.99 a month. It's a big gap from where it was, $9.99 just a couple years ago. It is the kind of thing where they have that kind of flexibility. I do think the streaming wars is actually more an advantage than a disadvantage for Netflix, because it's going to make the other competitors basically skimp on content, fight each other out, and invest in marketing. When Netflix, everyone knows Netflix, it is standard cable of streaming world. You basically need Netflix if you want to be relevant the next time you're in a conversation with people talking about what they're streaming.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. The Motley Fool is a company that provides investing insight and stock recommendations for investors of all skill sets and risk levels. You all know how much I love researching new stocks and trying to find the next best investment, so I'm proud to partner with The Motley Fool to bring you 10 stock picks from their popular product, Stock Advisor. Stock Advisor has beaten the market by more than 4 times, so go to fool.com/Frankel to get your 10 stock picks now. The Motley Fool Stock Advisor returns are 650% as of April 16th, 2024, and are measured against the S&P 500 returns of 148% as of April 16th, 2024.